everyone, and welcome to not another game of Fury of Dracula, but I am actually going to be watching through and analyzing and reacting to Legendary Tactics' recent video on Fury of Dracula. Because, as a true YouTuber, the best way to make your own content is to not, and to simply react to the hard work and good efforts of other people so I can be lazy. Or something like that. I don't know how to be a YouTuber, but let's look through this and see how much of this I agree, and hopefully you can learn a thing or two.
There is an allure to playing Count Dracula in the board game Fury of Dracula.
So now this part I actually do disagree with, and I just don't get why people like playing as Dracula. I mean, like, if I were playing a World War II game, would there be an allure or desire for me to play as Hitler? No. And I don't know why other people would either. I mean, I guess Dracula's very powerful, and that's fun. Um, it, and, but, like, Dracula's evil. Don't be evil.
Who wouldn't want to carry on a bad Bela Lugosi impression over the course of an entire 2-hour game?
Okay, alright. So I do understand the appeal of bad accents. As an American, it is my obligation to do bad accents for things. So I suppose I can appreciate that. Although you don't generally do voice comms on the digital edition of the game, but maybe more people should, and then maybe Dracula will be more enjoyable to play.
But the hunters are going to be after you, so you're going to need to impress them with your deft maneuvering, or the hunters will make you eat your Transylvania trash talk. This strategy guide will give you the tips you need to survive. Welcome to Legendary Tactics.
See, I think the hunters need more learning than Dracula does, but they also
Playing
did
Dracula
one on
in this game is a lot of fun,
hunters.
but a real challenge.
So he said, playing Dracula in this game is a lot of fun. I would say that that's true, although I would caution new players with letting them know that there is a lot of downtime when you play as Dracula, and you really need to know that going into this game. Some games are designed very well so that there's not very much downtime. This is an old school board game from back in the old yesteryears of 1980s. And so there's a ton of downtime, and you just sort of have to be okay with that.
Especially if you are up against skilled hunters. You're going to need to keep your wits about you, and hopefully these strategies will give you a good start to learning how to play the vampire well. First of all, let's take a look at the board. You're going to need to take some time to get to know the board well. There are some choke points and some areas that can be tricky, where you could be cornered easily if you aren't careful.
So this is true, and I really need to do a video on this, and I'm glad that Legendary Tactics is pointing this out, about the asymmetry of the board and the gimmicks of some of the areas, like specific choke points, although they don't really get into that into this video. They just say, look at the board and, try to figure it out for yourself. Maybe I should make a video on that. It would be a long time if I wanted to talk about every single thing, but hey, I don't seem to know how to make short videos, so here we go.
While it is best to stay flexible and move wherever the hunters think you aren't,
that's true.
There are certain parts of the board that are quite simply easier to get lost in.
Not sure why they're showing the British Isles when they talk about easier to get lost in. That place, generally, it's actually pretty easy for the hunters to know that you're there, and often even to know what specific city you're in. The advantage of the British Isles is that it's so hard to move there and just to move generally in that area because of all the ocean movement. And at sea, generally, Dracula is just as fast as the hunters, which is not how the hunters went.
Central Europe, comprised of Gallia, France, Germania, Germany, Austro-Hungaria, and Baltica, also known as the Balkans, can certainly give you a fair number of options. They have the most plentiful routes, and somewhat obviously will be a good place for Dracula to hide.
Okay, that's kind of a big swath. So I agree with a lot that was said there, but maybe not in the combination that it was said. I wouldn't include France/Gallia as part of, air quotes, Central Europe. Geographically, it's very different than the Central Europe area, which isn't necessarily Germania. It includes these cities, I would say, and some of these northern areas. And I wouldn't include Austro-Hungary really as part of that either. There's a huge dividing line between Austro-Hungary and the rest of Central Europe. Central Europe, yes, it's true. Exactly what he said. Lots of connections, very easy to get lost. Only city with 7 connections in the game. Very easy to make it hard for the hunters to know where you're at. The Balkans is not that way, actually. The number of connections on cities generally is pretty low. The advantage of Austro-Hungary and the Balkans, which I would include as part of its own area, is that there's so many horse connections and very few rail connections, and all the rail connections are yellow. That's really the advantage. So it's very hard for the hunters to move. Here, it's very hard for the hunters to find you. So including this all in sort of the same plate, not really what I would go with. But a lot of what he said was indeed true.
But what of places like Italia, Italy, or Britannica, England? Aren't these too limited and narrow?
It is interesting to compare both of those. There's a lot of truth in comparing both of them, in the sense that Italy and the British Isles are places where you can escape from to sea pretty easily, and to multiple seas. So in that sense, they have some stuff in common.
Even Iberia, Spain can feel that way sometimes. Well,
If you're playing right, Iberia doesn't really feel like a death trap. Iberia is a slow escape to the sea, is what Iberia is.
this is where the mind games of Fury of Dracula come in. Italy, for example, seems like such a dangerous place for Dracula to be, with more or less linear and limited pathways in the south, and areas close to where the hunters generally are in the north. But at the same time, you can use that to your advantage. The hunters may not think that you would be stupid enough to hang around in Italy because you could be so easily cornered there, and therefore, they may not focus their search in that direction.
So this I kind of disagree with. He's talking about mind games, and he's absolutely right when he says that there's a lot of mind games in Fury of Dracula, especially in how you move. But on a macro level of like, is he in Italy? Is he in Iberia? Is he in this big region, this part of the board? Is usually not really a problem, because you will have found Dracula's trail with newspaper reports, and you've limited down to, usually a few cities or maybe one or two regions, and so it's usually less a big question of what region he is, and usually more of is he in one of these two parts of the board. So in a little bit, he's true, but not really a lot. And I don't think I agree that Italy is really a scary place to go because of all the escapes to sea. And Dracula's really like to go to sea. It depends on what end you come in at it. And it can be dangerous if Dracula comes in at the wrong end and the hunters are waiting for him, or the hunters are able to use a consecrated ground to trap Dracula. There's a lot of ways with Italy and with the British Isles that a consecrated ground can really make it a dangerous place to go. But for the most part, they're kind of slow escapes to the sea, which make them sort of a punting sort of area where it's easy for you to find me. I'm going to waste some time here, and then I'm going to go to the sea and take some damage. That's how I would classify those regions, more than being a bluff type region, although they can be, especially with England.
England is similar in this way, but offers a potential hideaway that is off the beaten track. I love escaping to England when the hunters think I've gone south. It feels so safe.
That is true. There's a lot of truth in that. When the hunters are positioning when Dracula has gone to sea, you need to really think about, is him going to England going to be a really big problem? And if it is, you might need to even send someone all the way to England. Although usually just having somebody near enough that they can get to England is enough. And usually the choice is always between Dracula going to England or wolf forming from the Mediterranean. And both of those are kind of equally bad. Although wolf forming from the Mediterranean is generally worse, and so that's usually what happens. But he is right that going to England can really be a dangerous play. And so hunters should position for that. And if they haven't positioned for it, by all means, go there. Unless you are afraid that they will trap you with consecrated ground, which is a thing that can happen, and it can lose you the game.
You're going to need to read the board, listen in on the conversations the hunters are having, and see if you can fake them out. Cards like Summon Storms, in combination with a Move by Sea, can be very helpful in making them think that you are going in one direction when you're really headed in another.
So, at low level play, this is true. But at higher level play, the hunters will always know where you are within like 3 or 4 moves after the first week. So, bluffing to try to do like a macro bluff of like, am I on this side of the board? Am I on this other side of the board? Is not usually a thing that's going to happen, and you're not really ever going to get Dracula events anyway, so telling new players about how to use Dracula events, I guess, makes sense because new players are probably going to get more Dracula events if they're playing against new hunters. But for the most part, I wouldn't even talk about it. I mean, the one thing I would say about Dracula events is just hold on to them until you know they're going to be useful, and that's as much advice you need to give new players.
Or are you instead using those storms to block the hunters from following?
I mean, that's
You can
exactly
use
how you should
roadblocks
use
in
them.
a similar way. The mind games are a key part of this board game, and you're going to have to work hard to be as unpredictable as possible. There are too many permutations and combinations of this sort of thing to cover in a video of this sort. You will just have to get some playing experience with the game to get a good idea on how to do this and understand the personalities of the people hunting
Showing
you,
footage
not
of
just
Fury
the
of
character
Dracula, but I get
abilities
what
of
you're
their
saying,
tokens.
yeah.
So where on the map board should you begin? Generally, and pretty obviously, it's best to start as far away as possible from where the
All new
hunters
players
generally
start
are.
in Ireland.
The exception might be if one of the hunters is set up well away from the others, in which case you might want to go into attack mode. I'll cover that a little bit later.
That's really true in second edition, setting up next to a hunter to attack, and that's can be new against new players who move on the first turn, but against experienced hunters who don't move for a week. And who starts Mina alone in England? You would do that in second edition, but though no, really, don't do that in second edition either. Yeah.
But the reason for the distance is because you want to build a trail that stands a chance of maturing, especially if you can play a vampire right away. And the more time you have for that, the better.
This is really good advice, and you definitely should listen to it. Distance, distance, distance. The only real thing I would say is you also need to be thinking about where you're going, and you don't want to position yourself in a way that you are forced to move towards hunters. But yeah, just with that addendum, totally what he said is absolutely true.
If you are more daring, and especially if you don't have a vampire in your initial hand, you may start close to the hunters, likely with a small city in between, and follow behind their movement. The hunter is unlikely to move
and that's especially good advice with his addendum of with a small city in between, because you don't want to actually start right next to them. Yeah, that's good
towards
advice.
you because small cities limit their supply action.
Yes.
They have no reason to turn around and go there, and keeping a little distance prevents you being found by the evil presence or local rumors events. But watch the board carefully from a high-level strategic perspective, and make sure that you have a potential escape route or two if the hunters get wind of where you are.
All good advice.
Just remember that Mina's special ability allows her to search an entire region if she is with another hunter in the same city, so don't be caught off guard. It is pretty standard for Mina and another hunter to be starting the game in a city like Vienna, and then moving through the Central European country.
Vienna. That's how I always do it. Yeah, all true. Basically, if I'm not saying anything, I'm probably agreeing with him. Again, this is overall a really good video, and a lot of this advice is really good.
Searching all the way with Mina's radar. This helps the hunters to efficiently narrow down possibilities. You can try and predict where they will be searching next and move accordingly, like into the region that has just been searched, but you can never be 100% certain that you won't be pinpointed this way. Remember that the hunters are going to try to be unpredictable as well.
That's true. Good hunters
So,
are unpredictable.
you may consider Spain or Baltica as decent spots to start, all things being equal.
That's true, although, I mean, most people start somebody in Madrid, although if they started somebody in Bordeaux, I think is the city, then maybe start in Iberia.
But it does of course depend on where the hunters are and which encounter cards you start the game with. If you want to be really sneaky, you could start in Ireland or in Cagliari in the Mediterranean.
Don't start in Cagliari. Maybe Ireland, who knows. But don't start in Cagliari because you cannot. And if I remember, seeing this part is part of the reason I wanted to make this video. You cannot mature a vampire in Cagliari if you start there, because your only move is to either hide or use a power. And if you hide, encounters on hide don't mature. So you're basically ensuring that the hunters get a free 4 turns, or 2 or 3 turns, depending on if you could just go directly to sea, before there are any encounters that they have to worry about. And you've just revealed, oh, hey, my first move is next to a port, and this move is also now next to a port, and you're giving them a ton of unnecessary information. Ireland, maybe. It can be good. I have seen some games where Dracula starting in Ireland has been very good. I mean, it's a kind of a noob thing to do, but it's fine. Cagliari, absolutely not.
Uranium. This can potentially lead to an unusual card sequence that will really leave the hunters confused at the very beginning of the
Okay, this I also disagree with. Unusual card sequences are bad for Dracula, because unusual card sequences mean the hunters can be like, oh, that's unusual, which means it can only be this limited number of combinations, which means he can't be here and he can't be here. Oh, wow, look at all these places he can't be, and that's what you don't want as Dracula.
the game. There's no question that Dracula is a powerful character that can hold his own in a fight. But
Yes.
getting into multiple scraps with hunters is not going to help you win. In fact, that is a losing path.
This is
You're
important
going
advice.
to want to avoid them as much as you can and fight only as necessary.
Yes.
That said, if a hunter happens to be on their own, it can make sense to play a more aggressive style, attacking the lone hunter yourself.
And I love how they're showing this. They're not showing him moving into Jonathan Harker's space, because that's usually not how you play aggressive. The way that you play aggressive is moving next to a hunter and dropping a really tough encounter. So then when they move into your space, they have to fight the tough encounter, and then you at night. That's the best way to play aggressive as Dracula.
Sometimes multiple times if you can, in a bid to get influence. This can be easier in the early game as the hunter.
Yeah, and of those, rats actually would be the better one to use if you were wanting to do damage, believe it or not. Because either you do damage, or you do damage and then you get to see one of the items they have. I mean, it's not a good card, but of those, it's definitely the best for being aggressive. If for whatever reason, in this case, Jonathan Harker was really weak.
Hunters don't have many items yet to defend themselves, nor tickets to get to your area faster. It does mean that you give your location away, but this can be okay if the other hunters are far enough away and out of position. Besides, the influence you can get with multiple attacks in a short time can really put the hunters behind the 8-ball.
So this is true for Reckless Vampire. It's kind of true for Reckless Vampires. It's not that true for Dracula unless you can kill a hunter. And usually you're doing this early in the game. You don't get a ton of points for killing hunters. Not as much as is required to kill the hunter. You have to do a lot to kill a hunter. It's pretty hard. And usually involves some mistakes on their part. It can happen. But it's a rare enough of a thing that it seems like a bit of a noob trap to tell new players that.
But understand that this is generally a risky play.
Yeah, okay. Well,
You can also attack later in the game if you are approached by a hunter with low health, and if you can use something like the Nocturnal Visit or Enraged event cards. Combat for you is always better at night anyway, as you have some cards with effects that are enhanced at night. But avoid combat with more than one hunter by any means necessary.
Always true, yes.
You may be able to take on 1 or 2 hunters if you have reason.
I don't know if I'd even say 2. Like, 2 hunters, yikes. I mean, it can happen, but yikes.
Reasonably high health levels, but your odds of survival are pretty low if you are up against 3 or 4. And do your best to keep track of what items each hunter holds. This is valuable information, and is why some of your encounter cards cause the hunters to simply show which items they hold.
This is really true, and I wish the game was better about keeping track of this information.
You need to know, for example, if Heavenly Host is held and by whom, as that card can be deadly for you. Dracula will likely be sucked into combat at least once during the game, and you need to know the combat cards well. I will take a quick look at them here. Speaking of the cards, you will want to be intimately familiar with your combat encounter, and power cards. Plotting is a great defensive card that can be used effectively against a hunter with many items.
Okay. Um. So I don't want to be mean. So I'm going to start with what I agree with in that statement. Plotting is defensive in the sense that it doesn't do damage, and so it's not aggressive. I guess you could say it's not aggressive. Plotting is the card that you use to counter someone else's defensive card, like Garlic or Dodge. Or Crucifix, but Crucifix is an aggressive card. It's not really a defensive card. So I'd say for the most part, it's used to counter Dodge and Garlic, since those are more commonly used cards. And I would say something that counters a defensive card is an aggressive card. But that's kind of a semantics game, so, who cares? It's just semantics. Them saying that it's good against hunters with many items, I really disagree with. Because plotting counters the basic cards, so if a hunter has a lot of items, they're generally not going to be using a lot of basic attacks. And if they have a lot of items, that means that they're probably weapons, since they're more weapons than other kinds. Weapons or Heavenly Hosts. Things that will do damage to plotting. So throwing down a plotting, and then you get hit with Heavenly Host or a knife or a weapon, that is not what I would call a win for Dracula. It's a combo card for later, so I would call it an aggressive card or an anti-dodge card. Calling it defensive, I think Strength and Mesmerize are your defensive cards.
Even though it can be easily blocked, it can help you with exactly the card you need at the right time and gives you the option to block an engaged hunter's punch, dodge, or escape actions, which is helpful in dictating the rhythm of combat to some extent.
So all of that is true. So that's why I don't want to get too mean on disagreeing with the previous part, because everything he said about plotting after that is definitely true.
Mesmerize is also a defensive card that can help offset any weapons the hunters may try to use against you. Fangs is a high risk.
See, that's true. Again, I would say Strength is the other defensive card. I think Mesmerize and Strength are defensive cards because they're the things that stop you from taking damage. I don't know how to call something defensive more than that.
High reward card that is used in combination with Mesmerize to bite one of the hunters and remove them from combat. This is especially fun when used as a counter to the Heavenly Host item. Claw.
Yeah, that's all I'm going to say about that. He uses completely right about Fangs. High risk, high reward, combo with Mesmerize, the thing you use to counter Heavenly Host.
Claws is a card that can cause some good damage, but is most importantly used against the Garlic Wreath.
No. Garlic Wreath is a bad card. You don't have to worry about it. Mesmerize is a better counter to Garlic Wreath because it's also defensive. Yeah, Garlic Wreath is bad. Claws is... it's the damagey card. It does lots of damage, and there's some trickery things you can do with it to kill hunters. But Garlic Wreath is never something that should be on anyone's radar in terms of strategy.
Strength is a core card in your combat deck. It can not only do damage, but also cancel Punch, Crucifix, or a weapon card, and, if the battle happens at night, it can help relieve the hunter of that Crucifix or weapon.
Yes. Everything he said about it is true. Calling it a core card, absolutely. So I guess in that sense, if he didn't want to also call it a defensive card, but instead wanted to single it out as being especially good, I can respect that.
The other two card types, Escape as Bat and Escape as Mist, gets you out of battle provided your Pride ability allows you. Escape as Bat is especially effective at night, as it allows you to clear your current hideout and secretly choose a city up to 2 roads away that is not occupied by a hunter.
Clearing your current hideout is bad, by the way. Everything else he said is true. Just the way he said it made it sound like clearing your hideout was a good thing. It's actually a bad thing. And I have seen people not escape as bat because they have some really good encounters where they are right now, and they really don't want to just kill him. Like they have a vampire, and they don't want to just kill the vampire for free. So keep that in mind.
Combat itself is always going to be a risk, especially if the hunter has items in hand. You're going to have to do...
Hunters should always have items in hand. If these are new players, Maybe they won't, but yeah, hunters are never going to be have less than 2 items, and they're pretty much always going to have 3.
Do your best to guess what the hunter might do and try to counter. You don't need to do damage every round. Sometimes taking a turn to put plotting or mesmerize in play early on can make a big difference. If
That's
you do
true.
end up in combat with multiple hunters, focus on the ones that have items. Hunters that don't have items can only hurt you with punch, which only does 1 damage if it lands.
So I'm not sure I agree with this. I think I can maybe understand his argument, but if you're in a group of hunters, you should focus on the weakest one, maybe to try to get some free healing off of their presumed escape. Um, I suppose I would agree with this in the sense that you want to use strength on the ones that have really nice items, or fangs on the ones that you think have heavenly hosts. But generally, it can be really helpful to focus on the weaker hunters, in my opinion. But this is more of an opinion thing, and it can depend on the circumstance, and so he might be right.
If you're not sure what items the hunters have, play defensively at first. Mesmerize will be most useful here, and plotting as well.
This guy doesn't play against people who like to punch a lot like I do, which may be a thing. It may be a meta thing. He just doesn't play in a meta where there's a whole bunch of punching going on, which is fine.
Strength will be your basic combat card as it cancels so many of the hunter's attacks, and even discards items if the battle is happening at night. Use fangs and claws more judiciously, especially until you know which items the hunters hold.
That's true. I would agree with that. The only exception I would say is the first turn fangs try to beat a first turn heavenly host. But again, that kind of depends on meta. But yeah.
Don't be afraid to cut your losses as well. 15 health might seem like a lot at first, but Dracula's options are reduced considerably as the damage mounts. Escaping is a perfectly viable and sometimes necessary play.
Yes.
Managing the encounter cards will also play a key role in your victory. Essentially, you can view each card as a single-use resource, and so you must use them well. Let's take a look at them now. There are 3 aspects to the encounter cards. First, you have the ambush effect, which you trigger on an unwary hunter, the trap effect, which triggers when hunters search the space, and the matured effect, which happens when the card slides off the trail and the effect activates that way. In general, you're not going to want to ambush much.
This is the part
It's
where
much better to let
gets
the
too
hunters
scary,
waste an
to quote
action
Donkey.
searching that space
Because
and
as
running
a
into the
true
traps that you
YouTuber,
have
I
laid.
must quote Donkey at all times.
The vampires are
when
going to be
possible.
generally the cards you want to mature, although the effect for a card like Hoax can also be very beneficial.
It's the best mature effect in the game. I just wish he I don't think I can overstate that enough.
Because the vampires clear the hideouts located on the 4th, 5th, and 6th places on the trail, you will generally want to space these guys apart so that this effect doesn't remove a vampire encounter card on you. Vampires also have the beneficial side effect of shortening your trail.
I think I would have mentioned the benefits of double vamping. But yeah, for new players, it's fine.
Making you harder to find. Some other encounters help in hindering hunter movement or delaying them. These are best played in large cities that happen to have a bunch of rail links.
That's true, to an extent. I mean, for bats, it's kind of just good for anywhere where you think they're going to go. But if you don't know... don't play bats. But yeah.
Paris, for example.
What I would say is probably more true about the cities he's talking about is encounters that stick around. Like rats or desecrated soil. Those can be good in high traffic areas because lots of hunters will have to go there. But sure, a saboteur in Paris can be a real pain. So I agree.
And there are other encounters that are best saved for when the hunters are close. Cards like bats can be thrown down in a hunter's path to throw them off the chase, and others like Zagani bodyguards, Zagani mob, or rats can discourage the hunters from pursuing combat with you by giving them damage ahead of the battle or by causing them to discard items. Unnatural Fog is your best and most flexible encounter card overall. It can be used to great effect in many different ways, like locking down a hunter for a while, giving you a safe space to hide out, or as a natural obstacle for the hunters to have to work around.
This is all true. It's good advice. Regarding the previous thing he was talking about, I would have included dogs or wolves instead of rats. Just because rats isn't that good. I mean, I guess comparing rats to Sisgani bodyguards makes sense because they both deal unblockable damage. Um, but I would have also mentioned that generally you need to hit hunters with multiples of them for them to have really any significant effect. And I don't know if he gets to this, but I really hope he says that it's better to not ambush, but to wait to have it trigger, especially for the damage dealing effects. Otherwise, you're just going to heal at night.
This is especially true if used in a port, or if it matures, which gives you 2 fog tokens. For a much more
Oh yeah, that's true, and that's what I didn't talk about in my video. Is 2 fog tokens at ports. So you really should mostly only use it on ports.
more detailed breakdown on the encounter cards, check out a video on the Quincy Morris channel, which I will link to in the comments section below.
Now, see, this is the worst part of the video. Who is this Quincy Morris guy? He probably makes horrible videos that don't get any views. I mean, look at this. What is that, 40 views? 60 views? See, this is where he's getting off of rail. He's getting this no-name, nothing YouTuber, trying to get advice from him. See, the rest of the video, that was good. But this part, that's just, yeah. He's probably, like, ugly and really bad at driving. I don't know who this guy is. Let's get on to the real part of the video.
There are also a lot of in-depth videos about Fury of Dracula to be found there, including recommended hunter play as well.
Oh yeah, look at this guy. Oh, he thinks long means in-depth. Who's this Quincy Morris guy who thinks long videos mean in-depth videos? It's probably just him rambling about the same thing over and over again, or doing bad impersonations of voices and occasionally quoting memes. I don't know.
A quick word here on movement by sea. While a lot of people think moving by sea is an amazing way to throw the hunters off your trail, it does cause you damage and allows the hunters to stock up on health, items, and tickets, as they are not being hurt by your nasty encounters or vampires. Experienced hunters should still be able to figure out where you might be, so use it sparingly as a way to pop up in a surprising location now and then.
So I agree. The real key advice I would give on moving by sea is to move by sea generally as a last resort. Once hunters have committed to your current location, so that moving by sea will force them to move very fast, spend a lot of movement. It will take them a long time to get to the location you want to go. That's what I would say about moving by sea.
It's all part of being unpredictable. And finally, the power.
I think he might be overstating the need to be unpredictable in this game. It is important, but it's not as important as I think a lot of people say it is. But that's like a framing question, which is that's me nitpicking. Which is what pretty much this whole video is nitpicking for no reason.
Power cards. The power cards are important and sometimes necessary tools to winning a game with Dracula.
Yes.
They give you some great abilities, although remember that when you play these cards you generally aren't moving, which can hurt your cause long term. And some of them, like Dark Call, cause some damage to you. Some of them will be quite obvious in their use, like Feed or Dark Call. Dark Call is especially great early on in the game if you don't have the encounter card you want or need, such as a vampire. Feed will be necessary to help you recover some health, but at the cost of movement. You're going to want to use it when you've got a bit of space between you and the hunters.
And it may seem like this is obvious advice, but this is actually really important and useful advice because a lot of new players will just not use their powers. Use your powers. Your powers are really good, and you should use them, because if you aren't using them, it's as if you don't have them. Use your powers when it is a good time to use your powers. Don't try to min-max it to use it at the best possible time. If you can get a lot of value out of it, use it, and then hopefully you'll be able to use it again.
Wolf Form is a very powerful ability that allows Dracula to move up to 2 roads away, even passing through a hunter in doing so. This comes at the cost of a single damage. If you really want to be deceptive, you can combine this card with Hide, sowing confusion among your pursuers who can't be sure you are still in the same space or whether you broke out to the other side of their containment line.
Don't generally wolf form into a hide. just wolf form somewhere far away. If you want to be tricky, maybe wolf form nearby, because usually when you're using wolf form, they know where you are, and they're going to want to clear out your encounters anyway, so they're going to wolf form to the place that you wolf... They're going to move to the space that you wolf formed from, just to clear whatever encounters there. Occasionally, very occasionally, it can be tricky to wolf form into a hide, but just don't do it. And I hate how the UI is set up that it really is like, hey, you want to wolf form into a hide? And it like, oh goodness, how do I not? And some people don't even see the option not to, and they're very confused, and then they just click submit, and then they accidentally wolf form into a hide, and it's the worst thing ever. And I've seen it happen so many times, and I've accidentally done it myself. I really hope they fix that. But yeah, I would not. I like that he's mentioning that it is a thing you can do, but generally don't.
This card is likely to be used when the hunters are very close, but haven't
Yeah.
yet entered your space. But you may want to use it when you just want to put additional space between you and the hunters.
Yeah, no, I think I often see wolf form used when the hunters have been in your space. There's nothing wrong with that.
The hunters might think they had you panicked and cornered, as this card is typically used as a last-minute escape. Remember, be unpredictable. Hide is another example of a card that can throw hunters off the trail. When hunters are mathing things out, they assume that Dracula is moving one space per turn. This card can mess with that calculation, and works especially well with the wolf form power card and misdirect.
No. Again, so much in this video I agree with, and is really good advice, and I hope people watch it, especially so that they don't just listen to me, but have other advice. But no, hide does not generally confuse hunters. Sometimes, rarely, it can. Hide is used to combo encounters. That is the primary thing hide is used for, is to combo. So you have two encounters, and you can have one that does some nasty thing, and then another that benefits from that in some way. Either multiple things that do damage, or a saboteur and a vampire to protect it, or bats and a vampire to protect it, or two vampires so that the one on hide they have to fight through, and then they have to fight the one that's the normal one. Those kind of things is generally what you use hide with. Sometimes hunters will get a little confused when you use hide, but that's rare, and that's not really what you're going for with hide. You should definitely use hide almost on cooldown unless you think they have wax cylinders. But that's just because getting the encounter downs is good, and the other real big advantage, and this sort of goes in with what he was saying and makes what he's saying is true, is you're not adding another city on the board that them moving to will reveal something when you hide. Like, if you could have all 6 of your moves be in only one city by hiding and hiding and hiding, that would be really good, because still only one city they can see. But because you have to move and leave this trail, that makes it easier for you to find. And so that's another big value in hide that I think is bigger than them thinking you moved another space. But I think maybe that is also what he was talking about.
Speaking of which, misdirect allows you to sculpt the trail a little bit, perhaps removing a piece of it before the hunters stumble across it, or by removing the location card, allowing Dracula to double back through that city again. This is another card that throws off the hunter's math. This can be especially effective if you use it to clear a C location, as doubling back by C can be especially confusing, and it doesn't cost you an encounter card.
You can't use this on C locations. I know you used to be able to in 3rd edition. It says it right there. Can't be Castle Dracula, C location, or a location associated with hide. Also, it can't be a location associated with power, so you can't do it with wolf form. Yeah, because that'd be super dumb. You just wolf form, misdirect it, and then wolf form again. Yeah, you can't misdirect C locations, but everything else he said about misdirect is totally true. You want to use it when hunters are about to move onto your location, or move onto your trail to discover it. Don't generally be too afraid about the encounter that you're getting rid of. I mean, don't misdirect a vampire with a rumor token on it. And generally don't misdirect vampires unless it's an aristocratic vampire. But information can be really powerful, and forcing the hunters to go another turn with you less narrowed down, just increases the number of cities you could be at, and it's really valuable.
Finally, I will give you a basic trajectory of how many games will go. The first week is about keeping you and your trail hidden for as long as possible, especially if you are able to play a vampire onto your trail early, which you hope to mature for the influence points.
So this is true and not true at the same time. Yes, classic Quincy Morris dialogue. It's true in the sense that it is really nice to not be discovered in the first week, and that is something you would like to do. But there isn't a whole lot you can do as Dracula which controls when you're discovered. Newspaper reports will come out when it comes out. The hunters will either guess your location or not. The Okay, maybe don't start next to the hunters or be careful about dodging Mina. Those are things you can do to avoid it. But I'd say the second part of what he was talking about is more true of it's about getting your encounter system set up. The encounters that you want to try to either score points if the hunters don't get to it or slow down the hunters significantly as they're having to deal with it. That's the sort of thing you're wanting to set up in the first week.
The second and third week are more about survival. The hunters will have items to use against you, so combat will be more costly. The hunters will generally have more mobility as well. They will be closing in on you and working hard to clear your trail before it matures.
So I agree that combat is more costly in weeks 2 and 3, but not for the reason that he says. The reason why combat in the first week actually isn't that bad is because you can escape his bat on turn 2. And that is actually amazing. So if you are discovered super soon and you can snooker a hunter into trying to fight you in the first week, that's actually kind of a win for Dracula. If you can pull off the escape as Bat. And hunters should only do that if they really think they can counter the escape as Bat.
You will need to be very resourceful with your encounter and power cards. Be clever and careful. In the last week, the hunters will be under a tremendous amount of pressure. You will likely be hurt, but so will they. You might consider a few different options here.
They'll be hurt strategically. They won't necessarily be hurt in terms of damage. That only sometimes happens in the fourth week.
Like retreating to Castle Dracula to recover some health, fleeing to sea where you can get some distance ahead of the hunters, or even turn on a weak hunter that has been following too close. And that is a basic summary of how you will want.
Yeah, that's mostly true. I would just generally say not to flee to Castle Dracula. I would let the new players know how it works. You go there, hunters know you go there, and you get 5 hit points. But yeah, with how many other ways there are to heal in this game, Castle Dracula is not nearly as good as it was in 2nd edition.
Want to play Dracula. Most times you will want to be stealthy, but be aggressive when it is to your advantage. You have the bandwidth to switch gameplay styles, often multiple times during a game. Be unpredictable. We hope this strategy guide gave you some great ideas on how to play the Lord of Darkness
I think he's
better.
overstating the unpredictable
If you benefited
thing,
from this video and if you enjoyed it,
framing.
please do us a favor and like the video below. This is Legendary Tactics.
So yeah, overall, I would say a good video, and I hope you guys see it. I will have a link to it somewhere. But yeah, most of it is good advice. Hopefully my commentary on it can let you know a few more things about it. Do follow Legendary Tactics. They have some other videos on Fury of Dracula. And so I hope you are able to get better at the game and have Godspeed.